Dricus Du Plessis proves he is the real king of Africa, defends his belt for the first time against former champ Israel Adesanya. And it was a very even fight. The first 3 rounds, you're hearing all different scorecards, especially rounds 1 and 2, super close. I know 2 of the judges had Dricus up 2-1. Round 3 was a clear round for Izzy. And then in round 4, it looked like, the momentum was really turning. And then as we've seen with Dricus, just because of his body language or because the success the other guy is having doesn't really seem to matter in the long run, and he's always going to be there, right? So the question remains, when is someone going to solve this style of Dricus Du Plessis? Like, I thought Dricus's style was kind of going to play perfectly into what Izzy wanted to do with the counter striking, with him kind of just charging in there with reckless abandon. I thought Izzy was going to find some openings. And there were definitely openings. There were multiple times in the fight when Dricus would charge in like that, you'd kind of hold your breath. Something that I'm happy that people are acknowledging. I said this before the fight. It seems that Du Plessis has a great team. He has great coaching, and he comes in with very good game plans. His Whitaker and Strickland game plans were awesome, and we saw him end up winning those fights. I was curious to see what his game plan was going to be coming into this fight. The clear path to victory for Izzy was if Dricus was to charge in like that and leave himself open for counters, which Izzy would take advantage of, right? That was kind of the path to victory for Izzy. So I didn't think that Dricus, I thought he would be a little bit more cautious with his entries, and he really wasn't at all. Like, those openings were there. There were many times where I was kind of holding my breath, waiting for Izzy to clip him. And Izzy just, I don't know. I guess people really can't figure out Dricus's style because, like, on paper, or when you watch the film and you watch the bad footwork, the not really being defensively sound, you're kind of just waiting for someone to take advantage of that. And I thought Izzy, there were moments where he should have capitalized. And I don't know, we just didn't see it. I thought his offensive output, like when he was leading the dance, that's been a big knock on him throughout his career. We were seeing that. He didn't look bad, but that was not the best version of Israel Adesanya. I don't care what anyone says. I'm assuming it's a confidence thing. This guy was undefeated for a big chunk of his UFC career. Then the narrative was that he's undefeated at middleweight because he just had that loss to Jan. But now in the last couple of years, man, we've seen a handful of losses start to pile up, and it's definitely gotten to his confidence because I have to think that there was a version of Izzy that would have just touched up Dricus as he came into range like that. Like I said, there were multiple times on the fight where I was tensing up, or I'd almost just like let out a mini scream because I was so sure that Izzy was about to clip him, and it just didn't happen. So I'm curious to see if anyone's going to be able to solve this style, but nothing but respect to Dricus Du Plessis. I thought he looked great. What an absolute dog. This sport is so different than football and basketball where like people, you say, oh, like this guy just wants it more. I don't think that really applies to a lot of sports. It certainly applies to a fist fight, and Dricus Du Plessis wants it more than everyone. He's a bad motherfucker. He's willing to take shots. There are times in the fight where he just looks completely gassed. He looks, like the fight's really starting to turn on him, as we saw in that 3rd and 4th round on Saturday, but it doesn't end up mattering. The guy just keeps pushing through. It's really unbelievable to watch, man. Like he's kind of, the drunk uncles at the barbecue. It doesn't look the prettiest, but it's kind of cool to see a UFC champion with that style, the way we all break down the technical aspects of the sport, to see a guy kind of just come in there and will himself to victory after victory is pretty astonishing. And the guys he's doing it against, to take out Rob Whitaker, Sean Strickland, and Israel Adesanya, 3 fights in a row, 2 of those being finishes, is just unbelievable. I quite frankly don't have the words for it. And now, we're going to see him fight Strickland again. And I think he's going to beat Strickland, and I think he could finish him. I think, it was a pretty close line when they fought in January. Strickland was a slight favorite, and most of the money was coming in on Strickland. I think we're going to see a very different line now. I think Dricus Du Plessis will be a big favorite. No, not a big favorite by any stretch, but he will be the favorite now, regardless of what people think happened in the first fight. You know, I'm going to make a video. You could check it out, talking about what's next for each fighter from UFC 305. But I definitely think that they're going to give Khamzat a title shot if he wins in October. And that fight is far enough in the future that, like, you know, if Khamzat wins against Robert Whittaker, he's just going to be able to sit out and wait for a title shot against the winner of Strickland versus DDP. Unless, well, you know, if Strickland wins, then I guess they have to do a trilogy of that. I mean, I don't know. And who knows if Khamzat's actually going to end up fighting, but you know, the UFC really wants that. As much hate as Izzy gets, as many people wanted him to lose this fight, I don't care, you know, how big of a hater you are. It's kind of sad to see Izzy go out like that and to see how his career has unfolded these last couple years. I used to be a huge Izzy fan. I can't really say I still am, but, like, you know, I still have a lot of respect for the guy, and seeing him lose in that way was just a little bit heartbreaking, to be honest. And he has always had good takedown defense. So I think Dricus is, again, we talk about the technical aspects of the sport. You think this guy's got the best entries on his takedowns, man? Like, he just tackles you like a linebacker. He's built like a linebacker, and if he was born in the USA, I'm sure he'd probably be starting, you know, maybe he'd be challenging my buddy Justin in the Denver Broncos linebacker room. But, you know, he was born in South Africa, allegedly, right? You know, a jury's still out on that one. But, yeah, he's fucking jacked, dude. He is so big. But, you know, even Jan Blachowicz, it wasn't like he was ragdolling Izzy. He was able to take him down a couple times in that fight. But for the most part, his takedown defense was pretty sound. And his ability to get back up on the ground to fight off submissions has always been very strong. So Dricus did have more success than we've seen in the past. Obviously, Izzy's first time being submitted, like, you know, Dricus rocked him on the feet in that fourth round. I think Izzy was a little bit out of it. He was kind of stumbling. He turned his head. We've never seen Izzy do this, man. Like, I wanted to wait a couple days to make a video about this, and clearly I still don't have any words for what we saw on Saturday. Just did not see that coming. I thought there were many paths to victory for Dricus Du Plessis. By the time the fight was starting, I was saying that he was going to win. I picked Izzy earlier. I was back and forth. I'm not claiming to, you know, I came on here and said Izzy was going to win, but I did see many paths to victory for the guy, and none of those were him having as much success as he had on the feet. Another talking point, you know, Izzy did have some success to the body with Dricus. We know how high his guard is, so maybe that is a something that future opponents, I'm sure Strickland is noting that. But, man, Dricus Du Plessis, the real African champ, now defends his middleweight belt, and I think, you know, he'll be a favorite against Sean Strickland here in the coming you know, who knows when that fight will take place. Man, I just shout out to Israel Adesanya, a true legend in the sport. You know, I'll talk more about that in my other video about what's next for him, but, you know, I kind of thought he was going to retire. 185 has a bunch of bums. He could definitely still beat these guys. What an insane stat. This guy, the last time this guy fought in a non-title fight was against Anderson Silva. This was in February of 2019. Kind of crazy. I mean, the guy fought 2 months later. Remember, I mean, he fought like 8 times in his first year in the UFC. It's unbelievable. His activity, his reign. I just got to shout out Izzy. It was tough seeing him go out like that. And yeah, I don't know what's next for him, but a hell of a career, if that is it. I know he said it wasn't, but he doesn't strike me as the guy that would retire in the cage after a loss. I just don't think he's that guy. He does strike me as the guy that would take his gloves off and kind of hint at retirement while Dricus was still speaking to take the attention off him, but not to actually retire. But great fight. I thought that definitely lived up to the hype. Kai Kara France versus Steve Ercig. A major upset that I think maybe, not to say we were overrating Steve Ercig, I think it was more underrating Kai Kara France. This guy has been in the top of that division for years now. Unbelievable power at 125, as good as it comes in the weight class. We knew how high level his striking was. I think we all just thought Ercig, you know, we haven't seen him in there with anyone high level other than Pantoja. So I think from that performance, not to say that was a one-off performance from him, but, like, you know, we all thought that this guy was as legit as they come. We just saw him have a lot of success against Pantoja on the feet and on the ground. So Kai Kara France was coming off a long break. He hadn't fought in over a year. again, this was just one that you, not to say drank the Kool-Aid, because I do think Steve Ercig is still that good. And, people are throwing out, maybe we're about to see a Dom Reyes type of storyline here. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen. And I don't think it will. I don't think Ercig took him lightly, but he just got caught. It happens. He got cracked with a big left hand, and then he just got put away there shortly after. But the fight was over from the moment Kai Kara landed that punch. But, man, it was good to see Kai Kara France back in the win column. He looked unbelievable. It doesn't get much better than that. A guy who just went to a 25-minute war with the champion Pantoja to put him away in a couple minutes in the first round, is truly remarkable. So I think he earned a title shot there. I don't think flyweight has too much going on at the top of the division. I heard people say Royval deserves a rematch if he gets a win in his next fight. I don't see how you don't make Kai Kara France. Again, when the guy just went 25 minutes with the champion, a lot of people thought he won, and even the people who said he didn't win, it was about as close as it gets. And it was a couple self-inflicted wounds away from being the champion of the world. So you go out there and you freaking spark that guy out in a couple minutes. Pretty impressive. So, and I think him versus Pantoja is a super interesting matchup. Obviously, I think Kai Kara has the boxing advantage in that fight. And we've seen Kai Kara France have great takedown defense. So, again, I think that plays into how this fight, maybe we were looking past him just because of how good we thought Steve Ercig was, because of how good he looked in his last fight. But I think Kai Kara France is a pretty decent matchup for Pantoja, and I think that would be a banger of a fight. So Pantoja, we know he's susceptible to getting hit, and Kai Kara France cracks like nobody else in that 125-pound division. So I think he earned a title shot. I hope that's what we see. Steve Ercig, man, what a brutal sport. What a brutal sport this is. He looked so good in his last one. He's still young. He's still in UFC years. He's very young. This was still like only his fifth fight, maybe, because I know he barely had anything going into that title shot. So who knows? He'll probably have to fight down next. I don't know who's next for him at flyweight. Again, I still think he's championship material. We see these guys, they get so close. Obviously, Dom Reyes is the obvious one, but you just hope this doesn't have too big of an effect on him and he's able to make a full recovery and still be a championship level fighter, because I believe he is as talented as they come in that division. He got caught. It happens, but I hope it doesn't have too big of an effect on his confidence and he can come out and he can get a couple wins and get right back in that title picture. But again, I'm very happy for Kai Kara France, because again, he's a guy, he fought for the interim belt. He was beating Brandon Moreno until he got a liver shot that just put him away, just a brutal shot that finished him there. But I thought he was having a lot of success. I thought he was winning the fight. Like I said, as good of a striker as there is in the weight division, and his takedown defense has held up against the top of the division. So I hope he's next for a title shot. But again, that was a great moment, another great fight. Moving on to the fight of the night, the moment of the night, in my opinion. And if you know anything about this show, best predictions on UFC YouTube. I obviously knew that Dan Hooker was going to win this fight, and I'm going to pick Dan Hooker. The Hangman gets it turned around in front of his hometown fans. If you're tailing me, you're making yourself some money. Yeah, man, could not be more happy for Dan Hooker. A couple years ago, it was not looking so good for the Hangman. We looked like, he was about to fall out of the rankings. I don't think he ever did actually fall out of the rankings. I know he moved down to featherweight to get knocked out in the first round by Arnold Allen, but I believe he never officially got bounced from the rankings. He lost like 4 or 5 at a point in his career after the Dustin Poirier fight, a fight in which he took life-altering damage, maybe my favorite fight of all time. He worked his way all the way up to the top 5, and then he nearly beat Dustin Poirier. This guy was about to be in the title picture. Who knows where, if that second round, the best round in the history of combat sports, if that's 10 seconds longer, maybe this guy is fighting Conor McGregor. Maybe this guy is fighting for a belt. But then we see, his career go about as bad as it can the next couple years. But here he is, man. He's got 3 in a row now. He just beat a top 5 guy. And whenever the rankings come out, he will be in the top 5. What a fight that was. Also, tipping the cap to Mateusz Gamrot, one of the best grapplers in this division. And again, some people are maybe pointing to the Muhammad Makayev getting released Maybe that had something to do with his style, but he came out there and, he was not just shooting for legs. He did have some success with the takedowns. Dan Hooker's takedown defense held up, which a lot of people didn't think it would, and he inflicted way more damage on the feet. So I thought he deserved to win. If you say that's a robbery, you're an absolute moron. He just put more damage. I mean, you honestly could have an argument for all 3 rounds, in my opinion. Like, he put more damage on him. I had Gamrot in the first, Hooker in the second and third. But, even at the end of the first, he almost finished him. So, if you give that round to Hooker too, I don't think that's a problem. Gamrot did have a lot more success than we thought on the feet. Again, he wasn't doing very much damage, but he just kept peppering him. You see what Hooker's face looked like after the fight. I mean, so Gamrot's striking may be better than we thought, but unfortunately, he does walk away with a loss. And fortunately for Dan Hooker, I mean, there are a lot of fun fights on the table for this guy, but man, how cool is it to see him back in the top 5 after where he was a couple years ago? He looked like it was, gatekeeper status on the back end of his career. And look at him now, man. Unbelievable. I'm very happy for Dan Hooker, and I think there are a ton of big fights you can make for him now. But, this division is more interesting when you have a character like Dan Hooker as opposed to a Gamrot. Unfortunately, it just is what it is. But like I said, Gamrot he looked a lot better than I thought, at least, on the feet. So shout out to Dan Hooker. I'm so excited for him. And what a fight, man. I thought that was probably the fight of the night. Actually, I guess the main event was. But, man, that was a banger, man. I couldn't be more happy for Dan Hooker. Speaking of bangers, we're going to make a sharp left turn here. Tuivasa. Am I the only one that agrees with that judge that I had it, 30-27 Tuivasa? I mean, holy smokes. I don't really care. I mean, Jairzinho is more technical than most heavyweights. He's going to lose to the good heavyweights. He's going to beat up on the bad ones. It's, very clear at this point. That's what I said going into the fight. That's exactly what happened. Tuivasa had a very fun 5 minutes of fame there when he was sparking people out, when he clipped Cyril Gane in a loss. That was still fun. He was maybe a fight away from a title shot. And now we've seen 5 losses in a row. It is what it is, right? Like these heavyweights, there's just a big difference between the top level contenders and even the middle of the pack, not just the bottom of the rankings. So Jairzinho, I mean, I don't know. He's going to lose to. There are a couple. I don't really know who you give him. You give him anyone who can spell wrestling, he's going to lose. You give him. I don't know. I guess he could beat some. He's already lost to pretty much everyone good in the division. He lost to, I would say, Blades coming off a title shot. But he already lost to Blades. He lost to Almeida. He lost to Volkov. I think Sergey Pavlovich is a name you could throw him out. Or the fight everyone wanted to see a year ago, Derek Lewis. That would be awesome. When I was looking, I thought they had already fought at least 4 or 5 times, but I guess not. But the bigger thing that we want to talk about with this fight is at what point do these refs get held accountable? I know he got fired, so I guess that answers my question that they are being held accountable. But you saw this chump get up on the post-fight interview and just be like, yeah, not really our problem. I'm sure someone in the athletic commission already spoke to him. That's who made the call to get him yanked in the middle of the card, because I don't think, to my knowledge, that had never happened before, a ref getting yanked out in the middle of a card. But that has to happen more, because there is no possible way that you could have had that 3-0 for Tuivasa. I thought it was a 3-0 in the other direction, but this is not the first time. It's just getting more. How many times does the face of MMA YouTube have to get on here and be talk about how ridiculous this is? Because everyone just keeps talking about how ridiculous it is, and nobody's doing anything about it. And I know the UFC, they always just say it's the athletic commission. Well, you're a multi-billion-dollar company. Why are we just letting this stuff happen? I always hate when we complain and you say it has to change, but you don't have a solution, right? Joe Rogan has always talked about how there needs to be a more clear scoring system, right? Because there is no possible way that you could have Tuivasa winning that fight. There was no possible way that you had Paulo Costa up 4-0 against Strickland. Cheetah Sandhagen is another one that pops up. but some of these fights are just ridiculous. So like, I don't know, the UF, like there needs to be a more clear scoring system. I know I'm not giving that guy like that was the worst scorecard I've probably ever seen. So he did make history, but I think like a 10 must system, which works in boxing, just like does not work in MMA. Like so many rounds go so differently. Like even when you break down, everyone talked about DDP versus Strickland 1, like there were clear rounds in that, and then there were complete toss-ups. Like I thought 4 of the rounds were pretty clear, and then there was 1 toss-up. So like the fact that rounds 1 and 5 that Strickland clearly won in that fight are literally judged the same way as round 2, which pretty much is 50-50 depending on who you ask. There wasn't a clear winner of those rounds. That isn't how scoring should work. In my opinion, I think that would fix a lot of these problems. Now, how does that work? I don't know. Is that more 10-8s, even down to 10-7s? Again, how exactly would that work? I'll have to sit down and, come up with a better idea. But I just don't see how you could have all these 10-9s for wildly different things. Boxing and MMA are just so different. And even in boxing, they give out way more 10-8s than they do in the UFC. So like it could start there. I think there's a million different things you could do with the scoring. But to just keep giving, like, for a round where a guy gets cracked and he clearly wins, he easily, it could be a borderline 10-8, but they give him a 10-9. The fact that that's judged the same way as like a literal toss-up that 50% of people think is one and the other half think went to the other, like these should not be getting the same amount of points, in my opinion. But story for a different time. Biggie boy, let's see if you're for real. Obviously not. Tuivasa, my condolences, my friend, because I'm a fan of yours, and it's always better when we're seeing a shoey on the way back from the octagon instead of, whatever you do after a loss. But moving on. One of the stories of the night, in my opinion, Carlos Prates. Are you kidding me with this guy? Are you kidding me with the fighting nerds? Will any of them ever lose? Probably not, but holy smokes, is this guy legit? That was one of the moments of the night for me. I could not believe how good this guy looked on the feet against a seasoned veteran. I do think, the Leech, this was a very clear, I thought Prates was going to knock him out. I said that before the fight. The Leech was coming off a near 2-year layoff where he just got neck surgery. So like that is not good for an MMA fighter, but especially against this guy. Daniel Cormier keeps saying he reminds him of Anderson Silva. Talk about like a good guy to be compared to. But man, does this guy have power? Does this guy have insane stand-up? I said this before the fight, but this guy is on a 10-fight win streak. He's on a 9-fight knockout streak. Most of that took place before the UFC. This is a guy from the Contender Series, but he's got 4 fights in the UFC, 4 knockouts, 4 for 4, but before 9 knockouts in a row, just ridiculous numbers. In his career, he's got 20 wins, 15 of them being knockouts, 3 submissions as well. But a very interesting thing with this guy that I just heard before the fight was that his record doesn't look too pretty for a guy with this much hype around him. But he said at the beginning of his career, he was kind of just taking any fight he could get. He would take fights on one day, on 1 week notice. He needed money. He was completely broke. So he was just fighting for money. He didn't really care if he was going to win or lose or if he was properly prepared. He said he's got more money now, and it's all going to his fighting, to his body, to his recovery. And man, is it showing up. He says he kind of made the turn in about 2021. This guy has looked unbelievable. Like, I cannot believe what he just did to the Leech. I'm not saying the Leech is like, a top guy or anything, but I think Prates might be, and I think it's time you throw him in there with a top 15. There are a couple interesting fights you could make at the bottom of the welterweight division, but this guy is legit, man. He's legit. And I'm excited to see what this guy does in the UFC. That was just beautiful. I cannot stop watching that hook that sat him down, man. He looked great. He hurt the Leech multiple times. He looked confident in there. He looked fast. He looked precise. I think this guy's a legit contender in this 170-pound division. Check out my next video to see who I think these guys should fight next. But UFC 305 Absolute banger of a card. I thought it was the best card we've had in a while. And hopefully, they could kick off a couple more big ones these next couple months, because on paper they look pretty good. But I'll be saying who I think these guys should fight next in my next video, so go check that out too.